Hi there. Welcome to this year's Animexperience workshops online. My name is Robin Webb. I'm a freelance animator. I've been doing Animexperience workshops for almost 20 years, since 2003. Um, and I must have worked with thousands of people in that time, kids, young adults and adults. Um, and we must have made hundreds of films, bringing your stories to life. And these workshops are designed to impart some of that knowledge to you, so you can then make your own animations as well. So these workshops are going to cover four main areas. The first one is writing for stop motion, and then we'll look at designing and making characters and sets for stop motion. And then we're going to look at how to actually animate your story, and we're going to talk a little bit about sound production in that, and also about the apps or the software that you can use to create that. And then finally we'll look at editing. Okay. As we go through the workshop, I'm going to be setting you some challenges to help you write your story. It'll be a good point to pause the video at that point so that you can then do the challenge, and then you can come back to the video. And hopefully at the end you should end up with a nice short story ready to be stop motion animated. Okay, so what do you need and what are you going to end up with? Well, you'll end up with a story. We know that already. So the other things that you're going to need are a pen or a pencil, something to write with or draw with. You're going to need something to write on or in, a sketchbook, a notepad, an iPad, even the back of an envelope. What is most important is for you to bring your imagination, because that's where all your ideas will come from. Okay, so in the animation industry, they write their stories in about 5 or 6 key parts. And what all successful stories have is a main character or a bunch of characters, and they have to do something, they have to overcome something, or there's a journey to find something. In other words, there's a conflict or a problem to overcome. And in the end, we solve the problem or end the conflict, and the main character learns something along the way. So many successful storytellers and animation production houses, they know all of this and they stick to it because it works. Think of all the Pixar films you've ever seen. What's the problem that needs fixing? Okay, so great stories always follow this simple structure. And there's a few things that you can add in to your story that will help to tell it and make it interesting for your audience. Okay, so before we get started and we get into this and we start looking at the challenges, I'm going to give you some advice. Firstly, don't be too ambitious, especially if this is your first animation. Don't have an army of characters, just opt for 1, 2 or 3 and not too many locations. Remember, you have to create everything for your animation, so you don't want to give yourself too much to do. Pause the video, okay, that's very important. When we set the challenges, you should pause it, do the challenge, and then you can move on. And at the end of the video, there are some top tips for writing stories to help you if you're starting from scratch. Now, to get you started, I'm going to set a theme to get that brain juice flowing and to start ticking it over in your head. And the theme is Lost in Space. Okay, so in the story writing process, we start at the beginning where we introduce the characters and we introduce the locations where it takes place. So, and this is where we're going to set the first challenge. Okay, so this is where your first challenge comes in. And remember, once I give the challenge, pause the video, complete the challenge, and then you can move on to the next part. All right. So for challenge number 1, give yourselves 5 minutes for this. I want you to think of some characters. Okay. Now remember, the theme is lost in space. So who is lost in space? Is it you? Is it a human? Is it an animal? Is it an alien? You get aliens in space, I'm sure. So they could be in your story. Now, remember, don't be too ambitious. Don't have too many characters. 1, 2, 3 maybe, or even 1 for everybody who's animating in your group here. Now, the next part of this is to give your characters a name. Okay, so think of a name for them. And then after that, I would like you to give a brief description of what they are, who they are. Okay, it doesn't have to be too long. And I'm going to give you some examples here. So I've come up with Serena, who is the daughter of a rocket scientist. And I've got an alien called Bleepo, who's a green alien. He's got tentacles. And I've got Daisy, the spotted cow, who's going to get abducted. Okay, so they're my examples. You come up with your own. All right, so this is the challenge. You've got to come up with some characters, give them a name, and give them a brief description. Okay, pause the video now. Okay, so this next challenge is the next part of introducing your story. And this time we're going to look at locations. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit longer, 10 minutes for this challenge. And there's a few things that we want to try and get done at this point. So, first of all, we want to think of some locations. Where does your story take place? All right. So obviously, if you're lost in space, then one of the locations is going to be in space. That is a location. You could have a home planet, or like Earth, or you could have an alien planet. Or in my example, I had a cow, so you could have a farm. That would be a good location. What I'd like you to do, once you've picked your locations, is to give a little description of each of those locations. What is it about that scene that tells you where it is? Because you're telling the audience where your story takes place. Okay, so if it's in space, then you're going to have stars, and you're going to have planets and moons, and you're going to have asteroids and comets, things like that. If it's on an alien planet, you might have huge, massive mushrooms, overgrown mushrooms. It might be that you have purple trees. I don't know, it's an alien landscape, you can make it up. If it's a farm, then you might have a barn and a tractor. That would tell people that this is obviously a farm. Okay, so you could also do a quick sketch. That might help you as well. As you're sketching, you might think of different ideas of what could tell the audience that that location is where it is. All right, so you're going to get about 10 minutes. And your challenge is location, a description, and maybe a quick sketch. Okay? Pause the video now. Okay, so the next part of the story structure, the story arc that we're going to look at is where we identify what the characters want, what your characters need. Essentially, that means what is the problem that they have to overcome. And this will be your next challenge, challenge number 3. Which is to write down the problem. What is the problem? Okay, so as a bit of an explanation, as you've been coming up with your characters and your locations, you might have thought of some of these things already, so it might not be a huge challenge. But what it is an opportunity for you to describe in detail the problems that your characters or your character is facing. Okay, so the problem is they're lost in space, but that might not be the main problem, okay? They might need to find somebody to help them. They might need to find something to help them. Something important that will help them get back home. And very often they might try something and they might fail, okay? Sometimes they do succeed, but it might have unforeseen consequences. In other words, it might hurt somebody around them, or it might harm somebody's feelings. And generally this is known in animation and story writing circles as the low point for the character. So the challenge here is to write down what the problem is and describe it in a little bit more detail. And I'm going to give you a little bit longer. You're going to have 15 minutes to do this. So pause the video now. Okay, so the next part of our story structure that we're looking at is where we describe the solving of the problem, or how we fix the conflict that our characters are facing. So, and this is where we find also our next challenge, challenge number 4, which is how to solve the problem. So in the animation world, this is commonly known as the process. And this is where our character does the thing that they're supposed to do to achieve their goals. They might need to make a huge sacrifice, like giving up something that they love or something that they cherish. like Frodo in Lord of the Rings. He has to give up the magic ring. So it might be finding something as well, that if they've gone on this perilous journey and they need to find this thing that's going to help them, or it could be finding the right person, or in our Lost in Space story, it could be finding an alien that's going to help them get home. So in this challenge, you need to tell us about this, how they fix the problem, how they go about their journey, how they find the solution. Okay, so how do they solve the problem? You've got about 15 minutes to do this. Pause the video now. Okay, so in this last part of our story structure, we're going to look at how we end the story. Okay, and this will be your 5th and final challenge. How to end the story, how to write the ending. Okay, so what happens at the end is we usually get a conclusion to our story somewhere. And it might be that our main conflict is overcome. Or it could be that a baddie has been defeated, or the characters will come to learn something about themselves, or they may suddenly realise the importance of having friends around them or being at home. Or they come to an understanding about the reasons why they had the problem in the first place. So they're learning from what's happened to them, from their experience. So a good example would be, let's say, the character that I came up with at the start, Serena, who accidentally has launched herself into space after showing off in her mother's rocket that she's designed. And in the end, she learns that she should listen to her mother and not show off and not press buttons that she shouldn't have pressed when she finally gets home. So there's a good example. So think about how they win, what happens once they've won, and who's learned a lesson. Okay, so that's your 5th challenge, end your story. And I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to do this, and pause the video now. Okay, so after all that, you should now have a story written if you followed these challenges, and you should be ready for the next stage in creating your stop motion animation. We'll just do a quick recap of story structure, where we can further simplify the story writing to where it has a beginning, a middle and an end. So in the beginning, you're introducing your characters, the place and the problem. Okay, and in the middle, you're searching for the solution, and you go on a journey and there might be pitfalls. And in the end, you defeat the problem and you learn and everybody wins. Okay, so after that, you could expand on your story by writing a script. This is where you write down the exact words that your characters are saying. There might be other sounds and other directions that you would include in your script. And usually it's an essential part of the animation process. As you develop your craft, you could start to include a script, but it's not absolutely necessary for this workshop. But it is something that is usually essential in the animation industry. And another essential stage in the animation industry is to create a storyboard. It's a little bit like a comic book strip where you see what happens in your story in a sequence of images drawn out, usually by hand. And it helps you to produce and understand the timings of your animation and the staging of your scenes. In other words, what the camera sees. So that's the next step that you could take. But like I say, it's not essential for this workshop, but it is something worth considering for the future. Okay, so here's some top tips for helping you to write your stories. So you're faced with a blank page. Don't be afraid of the nothingness. There's no rules here. Be brave. Make a mark. Any mark. Write a word. Crumple the page. Spread it out. Fold it up again. Unfold it. Do a doodle. Don't let the drawing or writing thing put you off creating a stop motion masterpiece. You may already have an idea that you've been brewing up in your brain. Write your ideas down in note form to start with. Don't stress about fitting it into a structure or be worried that you aren't starting at the beginning. If you want to start by drawing a character, do that. Or if you want to start by detailing a specific scene, then go ahead. It'll all come together in the end. Another good tip is to carry a notepad or a sketchbook with you at all times, so you can, if you have any random thoughts, you can just write those down. Get into the habit of recording those little nuggets, because you can never know, they may flesh out into something fully fledged eventually. Don't be afraid of your imagination or your ideas. The weirder the better very often. Think of it like training for a marathon. We can't all be elite runners, but we can certainly train ourselves to take part, and think of this as your training for your imagination. So having an overall theme may help you to work out what your story's going to be. So you could pick something like Lost in Space, or a monster invasion, or having friends fall out, or any number of different scenarios. Or you can think of film genres, action, romance, horror, or musical. These are all great starting points for your story. Okay, so that's the end. Thank you for taking part in this, the first of the Animexperience online workshops, writing for stop motion animation. By now you should have a written story ready for the next stage, which I hope you can join us for, which is designing and making your characters and sets for your next stop motion epic. Okay, I'll see you there. Thank you. Bye.